Okay, welcome everybody. I'm just going to give a couple of minutes here, or a minute or so, to let everybody log in. We've got a nice large group of people interested here today. Welcome to the Friday webinar, everybody. I'm Derek Auger, the Executive Director of Conservatory Canada. Thanks for joining us. As always, I see our usual crew of people here, teachers filing in. It's nice to see you. Thanks for joining us live. Anyone who's not joining us live, you'll get the replay link, and all of you that are here as well will get the replay link, hopefully later today, but most likely Saturday, so you can watch this anytime. If anyone has any questions throughout this webinar, you can put them in the chat box or the Q&A. It's probably better to put the questions for our guests, our panelists, in the Q&A, and anything about Conservatory Canada that you can direct to me, I'll monitor the chat box for those. I'm also going to put various links and things in the chat box as we go. Okay, and in the chat we have greetings from Rehoboth, Massachusetts, from George Lythurst. George, welcome. Thanks for being here. Anybody else, feel free to put in the chat box where you're from. It's nice to see where everybody's from, what kind of audience we have. I suspect this will be coast to coast. Again, thanks for your interest. So this is the Friday webinar. Today we're going to be talking about ornamentation in the music of women composers of the Baroque era. And we have our three resident experts here in that field now. Olivia Adams, Cecile DeRosier, and Eleanor Gummer are going to share various things with you. And you're going to hear live demonstrations, including harpsichord and pianoforte today. And we're going to have them back as well. We just determined some dates to have them back to continue this series, looking at classical music and romantic music. They're going to look at classical music of women composers and interpretation on April 8th. And then on Friday, May 6th, they're going to look at romantic composers. So we look forward to those as well. The Friday webinar continues next Friday. All of you have gotten emails about that already with the registration. I'm going to have Michael Faulkner and Jennifer Omontato talking to us about the contemporary idioms voice syllabus. That's one of our first voice, one of our first webinars for voice teachers. So I hope voice teachers will be able to join us for an overview of that syllabus and some fun applications that you can use with your students for that. On Friday, March 18th, we're going to take that weekend or that week off the webinar. It's March break here in Ontario. And then the week after is still unplanned, but I'll hit your inboxes and Facebook, the teachers page, with information on what's going to be on that Friday. If anyone has anyone interested in doing a mock exam with me, I would like to do mock exams as part of the Friday webinar. Feel free to reach out to me by email and let me know, and we can either pre-record that or do it live on a Friday webinar, and teachers can mark along and that kind of thing. I'm really hoping to do some of those mock exams soon. The hard part is just finding suitable candidates who would like to do this either before or after their real exams. So I'm going to turn this over to Cecile, Eleanor, and Olivia. Thanks for joining us and your expertise today. I know everyone's going to enjoy what you have to say. So take it away.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm really happy to see the interest. I'm going to focus on Baroque music early grades. Conservatory Canada has added pieces by 5 women composers in, within grade 1 to 4. There's the Allegro by the famous anonymous composer, published by One Eye Publications with Eleanor. And also there's 2 pieces by Cecilia Barthélémon from a suite describing a battle, the capture of Cape of Good Hope. There's a piece grade 2 and another grade 3. And there's the 3 Elisabeth Claude Jacquet de la Guerre, French, Elisabetta de Gambarini, Italian, British, and Elizabeth Turner, British also. Now, those 3 all wrote minuets, and I'm going to focus on teaching the minuet to early grades. Why? Because very often it's the first Baroque piece that students learn. And why am I sitting at the harpsichord? It's because that music, 18th century minuets, were written for the harpsichord. It sounds great on the piano, but understanding the instrument for which it was written for, the sounds that go with it, helps a lot. The harpsichord makes things, makes certain things obvious, just by nature. To make it simple, the piano is a singing instrument. It sings beautifully. We're thinking, what comes naturally to a child is legato, long line, This is more of a dancing instrument. So crash course on the instrument. It's plucked strings. As you can see, it's quite small. This is an Italian harpsichord. Harpsichords come in all shapes and sizes. This would be the go anywhere harpsichord. It's small, it's light. You can put it on a stand as it is now. You can move it, put it in a table. It's bright, just to give you an idea of the sound. It's plucked strings. So I don't know if you can see, that's a plectrum, and it's all wood. And you have, it's a jack, and it's all wood, and you have the little plectrum that plucks the strings. Now, I have, wait a second. I have two registers. So this is the main one. And there's another set of strings. That's slightly softer. And then you put the two together. But as you can see, I have to go in the instrument and push a lever to change anything. So that means that in terms of dynamics, there's nothing much I can do because I cannot change that in the middle of a piece. And we're talking the same sound. So no possibility of crescendo, diminuendo. Which means that it's the composer that makes the changes. If the composer wants more sound, louder, he will write, or she will write more notes. That's where we deal also with the length of the note. Longer notes, more sound, staccato. So you can see the importance of the articulations. I'm trying to think. The other thing is, so right now I have the two eighths together. Another important thing is that the depth of the notes, it's much lighter. The action is lighter, it's not so deep. So trills are really, really easy. I'm trying to think. That's it. So, and that's what I wanted to say. Another thing that's tricky is a repetition of notes. We don't have the escapement system that you have on the piano. So the action is quite slow. So you need to leave time to the note to come back up before you can replay it and make sure that it's gonna sound. So that kind of things make the tempo of a minuet really obvious. If you see repeated notes in a piece, you can be sure it's not a fast one because the instrument just couldn't do it. It's a very, you can hear, it's a very energetic instrument, lots of sound. So that's why you find it in the rhythmic section in Baroque orchestras. You know, when this is a perfect instrument to play in Handel's Messiah, for example. You'll find it with the cellos and the double bass. It's the rhythmic section. It's the instrument that keeps the beat, keeps the violins in line. It also explains the connection that many students feel between more popular music, jazz music, and Baroque. I've had students who were really interested in jazz and suddenly discovered Baroque music and saw the connection the chords, the continuo, the improvisation aspect of it. And I also had students who started with me saying, I just want to play Bach. And suddenly, whoops, they discovered Oscar Peterson, jazz music. So there's a connection there because of the nature of the music. Now, I'll start with the Minuet in F major by Jacquet de la Guerre. I'm gonna play it. This is from her first book, so it was published in 1697. Jacquet de la Guerre, it's French music. They were very, they loved ornaments. So it can be a bit scary, I would say, to start with Jacquet de la Guerre because of the ornaments. Now, the role of the ornaments, when you think about it, there's two reasons for them. It's either to give an accent or to keep the sound going. So technically, we don't really need them at the piano. If you want to give an accent, you can very well play the note louder. The sound, the duration of the sound is much longer on the piano than on a harpsichord. You know, it's going to disappear very quickly. So technically, you don't need those long chords, long trills that can last for 2 bars sometimes. So we're doing them for stylistic reason. And I find that often students are scared. So if I play this one, you'll see she uses the pincé on the second beat, simply to make sure that the second beats are as important as the first one. Now, for a student, just a harpsichord is trick. For a student, it's not always easy to play those ornaments. So what we can do is you play them together and you release the lower note. And that works fine. It sounds fine. Another thing, at the end of the section, of course, you get the cadential drills. Problematic. The important thing to remember is French, you start the trills on the beat with the upper note. Another interesting thing is, see when I played this, they're written 8 notes, even. But in French, they had that tradition of playing notes inégales, so 8 notes uneven. That's a plus for a student. You can imagine a student with whom you've been working on a classical sonata, telling him or her, your 8 notes have to be even. Don't count the accent, strong beats, weak beats. And then he or she plays Elisabeth Claude Jacquet de la Guerre and say, no, play those 8 notes uneven. It's the style. So they're very happy about this. Now, one thing is that can be a bit abstract for a child, a student, is that character of a minuet. Because it's a dance, it was the most famous French dance, was Louis XIV's favorite dance, apparently. It was danced not only in France, but all over Europe, including the Germany of Bach, who apparently, I read somewhere that his best friend for a long time was actually a French dance master. So everybody was dancing the minuet. It's in 3. it's understanding the dance. It has 6 steps units, each requiring 2 measures. So for them, it's a bit abstract, you know, a dance in the 18th century. So I send them to YouTube. There's some wonderful video that they can watch, and it really makes a difference to see it dance. And if I can recommend 2, there's one that's called Baroque Dance Minuet by Il Giardino Armonico, and it lasts 1 minute 2 seconds, and it's just beautiful. It's a professional company. They're in costumes. It's all in dark green, blue, red. They're in a ballroom in a castle somewhere. It's just stunningly beautiful. And the other one, there's a BBC TV program called Dancing Cheek to Cheek by Lucy Worsley, who did lots of documentaries. And it's the episode 1 where she talks about dance in Britain in the 18th century. And I gave them the where to go. At 5:25 to 8, it's Lucy going to the school. And then later you see she teams with a social dancer, and they rehearse together. And at the very end, there's the performance in costume in a castle. And it's very well done, and it's funny because she's really bad. She's very, very stiff. So the children think it's hilarious to see her try so hard. But the way they show him, you know, the dance master really takes time. It's very, you know, effective, very intense. It takes time to show her the steps. So the students come back to the lesson with the understanding that, oh, okay, those steps are quite complicated and it takes time. So the character is noble, elegant, some simplicity, moderate gaiety, and moderate movement. So they come back and they understand that, you know, the tendency, as I said earlier, is to play legato, and often very fast. I took Baroque dance lessons last term online, and the teacher was complaining about the fact that, yeah, generally it is too fast. So that helps a lot. Actually, the tempo recommended for a minuet is between 42 to 46 dotted half notes. So that helps a lot. Okay, 3 beats per bar. General rules, the articulations, the left hand quarter notes will be detached. We need to feel the beats, and we need to feel the strong beats with beats. Yeah. Another thing that's quite interesting that they used a lot, again, like jazz, it's a rhythmic variety. So you'll get emiolas, 3 bars, and suddenly you have 2 bars of 3, 3, 4. That sounds like 3 bars of 2. So second part. So that makes it interesting and more, you know, jumpy, more energetic. Also, the use of syncopation, again, connection with jazz. Another one that I wanted to show you. Often we are it's our training as pianists. We are trained to do what's on the page. Exactly what's on the page. At the time, there was more flexibility. So the trills often There will be, it's going to be too heavy, too difficult to be clear for the child, or they will find themselves going to an exam and finding themselves playing on a big black piano with the action really heavy. There was a lot more flexibility at the time. You don't have to do them all. For example, personally, that's the D minor minuet by, again, Elisabeth Jacquet-Lagarde. There's some places where I find that the ornaments are too much. On the harpsichord, it's fine, but on the piano, it's like. See what I mean? That could be difficult for a student, first piece with ornaments. I would not hesitate to eliminate one and keep the other. So the one on the third beat, and again, you could do. And I would keep just the one on the first beat, eliminating the one on the second. Second part, it's. See, that makes a lot. That's another thing. You could simplify a trill on the beat. Instead, you do just an appoggiatura. Now, just to make sure, I would write those in the student's score for an exam, so that the educator knows that those are your modifications. But we should feel free to do that, to see that as, and it was the same at the time, see those as suggestions. Also, if you do the repeats, if the student does the repeat, then you don't need to do them all the first time. You can keep some for the second. And Olivia will talk about that a bit later. No, I'm looking at time. I want to show you some by Gambarini. Okay. That's the menuetto in F. See, the articulations are important there. It's in 3/4, a jumping, and it's in F. So I would, rather than, you would do. So that way, not only it's more dance-like, but you hear the arpeggio. Another thing is, very often we're going to play the chords arpeggiated rather than in a block. That also comes naturally. So the articulations help to bring out the melody in the writing. For example, when I do, so you hear them, now another one. Another question that arises often is the appoggiatura, what to do with them. For example, in the A major one, to be long in a slow piece. So this one, you have the choice. You can do 2 8 notes. It's a half note, and then the small note is a quarter. You could do 2, or you could do also just an 8 notes. Another one. There, the grace notes, you'll do them on the beat. So that's the idea. Italian, okay, French, German, always from the upper note. Italian, most of the time with the main note. You start with the main note because, and it's true with Gambarini, and it's true with Elizabeth Turner, who was British, by the way. They write themselves when they want the upper note. So it makes it clearer. Another interesting thing also is that Gambarini wrote certain slurs herself. She wrote articulations. Turner also. So, for example, in that fourth bar, this is her. So she has a slur over for 8 notes. So this is understood to mean that when there's no slurs, it's either staccatos separate or by beats, by groups of 2. Now, the last one I want to show you is Turner. It's a piece that I find just beautiful. It's in the grade 5. It's a Minuetto Affettuoso. She wrote articulations also by groups of 2. Sorry, it's better in the right key. There's many appoggiatura there. Those will be really quick, but you still have some flexibility. And it's fine. It's good. It's part of the style. It was, as I said earlier, much more flexible in terms of possibility and options, and we shouldn't feel that we have to stuck to the ornamentations. We can play and start easy. I find that the main thing for me with the student is just to show that they're just decoration, fun, and and I don't want them to be afraid of that and see that as a game, and you know, they can explore and experiment with it. So as I said, this is great because I find that my students, after they heard the harpsichord, they go and they play it, and they go back to the piano, and they have the sound in their ears, and it helps them to adjust that, the knowing the good sides and the inconvenience, the things that are not so great of the harpsichord, that are not as to the point as the piano, let's say, the repetition that's slower, you know, it makes them see what the instrument made obvious, and they go back to the piano and they feel the right tempo. It's easier for them to transpose the what is called the historical performance practices to the instrument, to their instrument, to the piano, using the resources of the piano, and keeping in mind the style of that music. So that was a crash course in the minuet from the harpsichord. So who's next?
We should stop for a question here, for 2 questions, Cecile, if we can, that came up for you. Okay, so George is asking, would you agree that for much of the minuet, you have to use a non-legato fingering in order to make the piece practical to play? In other words, our typical contemporary approach to moving around the keyboard with the legato fingering will not work.
Yeah, because yeah, that's it. We come often with well, if you think about even the children's song, you start, it's legato, there's a you go somewhere, there's a climax, and then there's a diminuendo at the end. So the children we all think long line. You know, the 19th century came after this. So yeah, it's impossible to, I mean, for me, yes, you have to go back to the dance feeling. And for that, you need to feel the beats. And so, no, the legato touch doesn't convey that at all. You need to think beats, strong beats, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that's why, you know, you need a bass with mostly quarter notes detached. You think the cello, 1 bow per note. Yeah, per beat. And as I said earlier, except when the composer, like the piece that I have in front of me, the composer, right? 1, 2, 3, 1. Then it's a special effect.
Okay, and so George, the follow-up here, he's referring and thinking more of the actual fingering, such as lifting and moving the hand in the arm, as opposed to doing fingering crossings to connect notes.
Wait a second, say that again.
So we're thinking, I'll try to interpret here. So we're thinking about, or George is asking about, you know, fingering where you're constantly tucking the thumb under to connect notes, legato and long phrases, as opposed to lifting and moving the hand more often, instead of trying to connect everything all the time.
Okay, yeah. I'm trying to think. You will find that I know it's, you know, yeah, you would move finger crossing. I don't find that in minuets, in dances. You're gonna, yeah, if you see, I lift my hand.
So that's what he's referring to, yes.
Yeah. But Okay, the other thing is that the harpsichord is, the touch is very light, right? You look at it and it's gonna play by itself. So your hand is always very light, and you want to stay close to the keys. And you know what I mean? Like, I cannot jump quickly, like on the piano, because it's living dangerously. So you want to stay not only as close to the keys as possible, but you want to keep the movements to the minimum also.
That's interesting. Okay, good.
Which brings me to another point. You know, I was talking about things that the harpsichord makes obvious. I was mentioning the repetition, but as happens often in Bach, if you see a piece where there's a big leap, suddenly that it's, you know, more than a six, I would say, that need a stretch of the hand, or bigger than an octave where you just have to move, you can be sure that piece cannot be fast, because on the harpsichord, it would be really dangerous to, you know, you need time to move and to make sure that the finger is on the note with the right pressure to play. Otherwise, the notes may very well not play again. So you're aware of the movements, of the speed of the movements. And so when you choose your fingering, you have to take that in consideration. You know what I mean? Like, yes, I lift my hand, but my fingering has to stay close. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I think that works well for what George is
Okay, good.
asking. And then Marilyn's asking, is there a website or some kind of resource to help with the interpretation of Baroque or classical ornamentation? It's always hard to remember whether to start on the note or the note above, and something that would serve as a good review for her or anybody.
Oh, I can't think of any site yet. I'm sure it exists, but I haven't, you know what? I still have been relying on books. The general rule is up to the 1780s is that the ornaments start with the upper note, except if you just heard the upper note before. And then with Mozart and Haydn, it starts to change. There's a period where both are acceptable, both are fine, and then it's a question of choice, and depends, you know, sometimes it's clear that you have a melodic line. So the appoggiatura will be chosen according to your melodic line. And Italian are more like, they will say, if they want the upper note, you'll have it, the appoggiatura. Yeah, but
Okay.
I should look at that.
Eleanor or Olivia, do either of you have an online resource that you would recommend?
I used to refer, Alfred's published a book called Ornamentation, and I used to refer to that a lot.
Yeah, same here.
I found that a very useful resource.
And
Yeah.
that was my thought too, yeah. Okay, and then other questions here. Cecile, could you repeat the names of the videos and resources you recommended for showing students the minuet dance steps again?
Yeah, there are many, but some are very dry and kind of, okay, personally I find boring. So the ones that because I don't want, you know, they're young, their attention span is not that long. So I found that Giardino, Giardino, Armonico, Armonico, and it's just Baroque dance minuet. And the documentary from the BBC is Lucy Worsley, Worsley, dancing cheek to cheek, the first episode. And I gave them the, where to find the 3 excerpts that I found really, really useful. I mean, if they feel that they want to listen to the 45 minutes video, it's great, it's fine, but I don't ask them. So it's at the very beginning, around 5, she goes to the school because she feels that she needs more training, and it's quite funny. And the dance master is very good and shows her the steps, and then he talks to the camera after that, making her is that evaluation, and at the end they're dancing in a ballroom in front of all kinds, a big group of people in costume, and they're dancing on, I can't remember which one, but they're dancing on a minuet by Bach that is in the syllabus also. So it's one more connection for the students,
Mhm. Okay, and then Irene is asking, how do you search for the BBC dance that you mentioned in YouTube? I think she might be referring to your YouTube presentation from last summer that I've linked to in the chat box, by the way, for everybody. Do you know what she's referring to?
She's talking about the BBC?
Yeah, BBC dance. Irene, I think you're gonna have to clarify for us a little bit of what you're thinking there.
That's the dancing cheek to cheek?
Maybe, I'm not sure.
I think she's probably referring to the video you just mentioned.
Her question came from a little bit ago, from about 10 minutes ago, though. Yes, the dance cheek to cheek, she says.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. I mean, either Lucy Worsley documentaries or just typing dancing cheek to cheek. I checked again 2 days ago and it's still there.
Okay, very good. Okay, those are all the questions we have for now. Cecile, thanks. And I guess I'll let you 3 carry on again here.
Okay, thank you, Cecile. I'm going to follow up with how we can talk to our young students about Baroque music and teaching Baroque music to our youngest students. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. All right, so a few things come to mind off the top of my head when we're talking to students about Baroque music is that we need to make it engaging. If they're not, especially with this generation, if the youngest generation, they're not having fun, then they're not interested. And so one way is that you can talk about the composer. You can talk about their life. I found with my students, the more and more I talk about the composer behind the music they're playing, the more invested and interested they are in their music. I just had a conversation with one of my students yesterday about Ignatius Sancho, who was an escaped African slave, and we had a conversation about how he came to become a composer. And I think if students are interested, if they're invested in the composer, then they're going to be more invested in the composition. Another way is to talk about the era of music. Where did it come from? How long ago? And you can kind of some ideas are to look up pictures online or have some pictures at the ready of what did the buildings, what did the architecture look like then? What did they wear? What was the fashion? What did the instruments look like? And then of course, have them learn about the instruments. I am doing a big section on Baroque music with my students right now, and I introduced the harpsichord and the organ and the clavichord to the students and showed them videos and pictures of what they look like. And one of my students was quite interested in the organ, and she said, "Oh, the pedals are so interesting, but tell me, how do they separate their toes to play the pedals?" and so I thought it was quite cute, and it started up a conversation of how do we play the organ, and so having them interested in the instrument that the piece was written for is also another way of engaging with them. Have the student listen to some Baroque instruments online and watch a video as part of their music history homework. And then, of course, introduce, like, why is it important that we learn about Baroque music? I unfortunately had a teacher when I was younger who was just like, we have to play Baroque music because you need to do it to take your exam. And so I kind of looked at it as, okay, well, this is the boring music. But if we can think about it as, joining the music that has been played for centuries, it might pique the students' interests even more. So don't frame it as boring music, because the students are going to pick up on that really quickly. Don't be afraid to make arrangements of some Baroque dances to make it accessible for your preparatory students. I found there is a real lack of Baroque era and even classical era music sometimes for the youngest students, and I want them to be learning that music history. So what I did, I'm going to show some of my own arrangements today, is I created some arrangements. So this is one I modified from Eleanor's collection of women composers, which you should all purchase, by the way. It's a fantastic book. And I modified it for one of my youngest students. And I'm going to talk through some variations that you can add. So this student, I have a student playing this piece. He's quite young, and he was having a little bit of trouble with keeping the rhythm. And so we talked about how the music was a dance. And what we did is I had him stand up, and we sang the music out, and we stepped the steps. So we took a large step on beat 1, and then 2 small steps on beats 2 and 3. And we sang the music as we did it. And so that was how he learned how to play this piece. That's how he solidified that rhythm. And he loved it so much that every time we have a new piece, he asks me, well, can we dance this one out too? Because he likes the internalization of the beat. Some ideas for you would be to take an example of Baroque music, and when you do the repeats, flip the dynamics. So if they decide that they want to be forte at the beginning, or mezzo forte probably, repeat, add a mezzo piano dynamic. I purposefully, in this edition, left dynamics out of it because I want my students to give their input. When they get to make decisions about the music they play, they take more ownership, right? They're more invested in the music. Another idea is have the student practice their piece. If they're on a keyboard or on an electronic keyboard, have them try it on a harpsichord setting. See how it changes the music. And when they notice the timbre of the music, oh, it's shorter, right? Then, just like Cecile said, it helps with the articulation. Another thing you can do, which Cecile has already done this and demonstrated, is adding a mordant to that middle note. So, and then another option is to add a trill at the very end. Because of course we know that F, just as Cecile taught us, is the longer notes. The trills were added to keep the sound going. And so we can add a little trill to keep the sound going. And all right, I'm going to jump over to the next piece of music. This is Allegro in G major, and this is by the anonymous composer who we think was Rosina Clavier-Buch. And I did a short arrangement of this for one of my students. Now, my student had, this particular student was having trouble learning the lyrics, or sorry, the rhythm of the piece. So what he did is he came up with lyrics. And now I can't hear this piece without hearing, it was a spring day in the morning. And he made this song about these animals going out to play because he said it sounds like springtime and it sounds like animals are going out to pasture and they're going to play. And so he wrote his own lyrics for this piece, and he is rock solid on that rhythm. Something I did to this arrangement of the piece, again, this is from Eleanor's book, is I added tenutos and staccatos to help show how we would want to play it, because we want to bring out beat 1, and beat 1 and beat 3. And so to show the emphasis, that was one thing I did. And now this student, quite young, can play with really fine loose wrists. And he's learning to move his hand across the keyboard rather than playing 5, 4, 4, 3, 3, 2. Playing with that legato fingering, like Cecile was just talking about. We're separating the fingers, and so students are then not associating a certain key with a certain finger. So that is something that you can do. For this particular student, I simplified the bass line for this piece, so I just have them playing whole notes. And then again, I have the student create their own dynamics. Next one here. This is the Menuetto in F major, and this is from the Piano Music She Wrote book by Sandra Mogensen, and it's published with Deborah Wanless Music Publishing. My student playing this, we were talking about adding ornamentation, and I believe this is in the grade 3 Conservatory Canada. So what we did is we added shrills to the first beat. So she played it through as written, and then what we did is we went on the repeat, what she decided to do was to swap the dynamics. And so the first 2 measures, she's going to play mezzo piano. And then on the second 2 measures, she plays them forte. And so it shows dynamic variation. So leave some decisions to the student and let them try something new. Even if they're adding ornaments and you're like, I wouldn't necessarily add it there. Let them try it. Right? Let them make those decisions about the dynamics, and then you can guide them along the way. And, I think that, perhaps this would sound better, or I think maybe let's try this dynamic because it's more appropriate here. But giving them the autonomy to add their own voice to the music. All right, and then my last piece that I'll share with you, this is a minuet by Gambrini, and Cecile has already played this for you, and she's talked a little bit about the appoggiatura as well. So you can decide on what you want to do with the appoggiaturas. I have a couple of editions of this minuet. One edition is that you can play, the editor suggests playing an 8th note to a dotted quarter note for the appoggiatura in measure 2. So the other thing that you can do is do 2 quarter notes. And leave that decision up to the student. See what they think is best. Again, there's that one at measure 20 that can be performed as a quarter note to a half note, or as a half note to a quarter note. So if you're playing the ending, or and then what I have one of my students performing this piece right now. She's preparing it for an exam, and what we've done is there are lots of trills throughout this piece Gamberini has written in, and we'll play some of them the first time, and then on the repeat we add the rest of them, and so that there's more variation within that. And also you're free to add some ornamentation as well, especially on the dotted half notes and the half notes. And so I left my student, I have quite a creative young student, she's preparing this for a grade 3 exam, and I said, you can add your own ornamentation on the repeats, because she enjoys creating those improvisations. And she came back and there were ornaments everywhere. And so I was like, well, I applaud I applaud your creativity. Let's strip it back a little bit, so so we can still hear a really clear melody. But she was able to insert them in on her own terms and be a part of the composition process. And so that's something that I encourage you to let your students do. Cecile has already talked about the articulation. One thing to keep in mind is when you're choosing articulation, keeping more of a detached style and explaining it to your students in a way that's because they had to jump. They were dancing. And so try jumping with your feet on the ground. Well, you can't, right? And so you want that separation because the instrument is going to mimic what our dancers are doing. That is another way of it. When I'm explaining tempo, I have one student that loves to, I'm sure we all have one of those students that likes to race through every piece. They like to play everything as fast as humanly possible. And I had to explain to this student, well, we need to play it slower. And I was like, well, why should I play it slower? I can play it fast, and the title says Allegro. Yes, well, we want to play it slower because there would be dancers dancing to it. And so you need to play it at a pace that works for the dancers. And then knowing that there are dancers dancing to the music, you're accompanying the dancers with that keyboard music, gives them more context. And think, oh no, that's going to be too fast for the dancers. You need to slow it down, right? And thinking of it, the tempo is more of collaboration between the instrumentalist and the dancers, even if we don't have a dancer. And speaking to the trills, I liked Cecile's idea of adding a crush note instead of a rotation. Something I always remind my students of when we're adding ornamentation, that you want to still emphasize the main note of the piece. So rather than starting from an upper note, start from the main note and then trim. And so that we hear that main melodic note very clearly. And I think that's all I have. I see that there's perhaps a question or two in the chat, and I'm happy to answer more questions directly. But anyway, these are 4 examples from my students, and I hope that you find some music that you want to play as well. And I'll pass the baton over to Eleanor.
Thank you, Olivia. I'm going to talk a little bit about sonatas that from the Baroque era today. The term sonata first appeared in the 16th century as an instrumental piece, and the original term sonata was referred to as a piece to be played as opposed to cantata, which was a piece to be sung. Domenico Scarlatti, of course, wrote over 500 sonatas as one-movement pieces in binary form and in a dance suite style. Other composers produced sonatas with multiple movements, and most in binary form. The sonata allegro form that we commonly associate with sonatinas and sonatas didn't originate really until the classical era or late 1700s. I've selected 3 movements from 3 different sonatas today, and I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so the 3 that we're going to look at, the first is by Anna Bonn, who lived approximately 1738 to about 1769, and it's her Sonata in G, Opus 2, number 2, and we're going to look at the Andante movement. Now, I'd like to compare the harpsichord version, which was very generously played by Cecile, and then we're going to compare how we might perform that on the piano. So here is the Andante. And, oops, let me just check here. I've got the wrong piece up. Okay. so you can hear all the ornamentation in that particular rendition on the harpsichord. On the piano, there are a couple of different things you could do. You could slur, but bear in mind that these originated as dance pieces. So perhaps an articulation. Now, before I continue on further, if you notice, there's some interesting things that are very Baroque-like in this. We have this wonderful sequence here in the left hand that happens. And on the harpsichord, it's not possible to voice quite as clearly, unless, of course, you're on the two manual harpsichord. But on the piano, it might be nice to bring out the bass here. And of course, you can shape that. The suggested dynamics that I've put in this edition range is terrace dynamics moving down in dynamics as the music moves down. So continuing on. So a few changes there. We have another sequence that happens on the second page, where again the left hand has some interest through here. And this is again where I would encourage a student to project the left hand just to create some interest in the sound. Now for the arpeggiations on the harpsichord, Cecile began with the upper note. Sorry. On the piano, you could do the reverse, but voicing the top note. And then the final chord, either beginning on the G or voicing up to the G. And I like to use a touch of pedal on each of those chords just to give a little bit of sonority to the sound. All right, the next example is a romance, and this is from Marguerite Salome Edelman's Sonata No. 2. It's actually published as a set of 3 sonatas. The first and the third were by her brother, who was the more famous composer, if you like. Very little is known about Marguerite's life, but this is really quite a lovely movement. And again, we'll listen first to the harpsichord rendition. the variety in the ornamentation as sections repeat. Also the added notes on the harpsichord just to make it interesting. All right, so on the piano, I like to slur the first two notes, although they could also be detached. So that's really a personal choice, or it's a choice you can leave up to the student. So there, I like to slur in the first, in bar 2, a slur on the first two notes, and then a slur here and a slur here, just to add to the, to give it more of that dance character. And then, now because the two phrases are very, very similar, parallel phrases, you could play the first one loud, the second one soft, much like Olivia talked about doing, or you can give a student the choice, but change it. We have that ability on the piano to change the dynamic level. So just to create some interest. So my own personal preference, I would probably begin the first phrase mezzo forte and then play the second phrase piano. And you could add a little trill for interest in there. Now, the B section. And then we have the A section repeated once again. Now, what's really interesting is the switch into G minor at this point, adding some tonal interest. And again, there you can really shape the phrases to add musical interest. And then the A section, the whole beginning repeats again. So again, you can use your imagination there, adding notes as we heard in the harpsichord rendition, or changing it just with dynamics. All right, the third piece I'm actually very, very excited about. This was found fairly recently, and it's a sonata for harpsichord by Beatrice Mattai, who flourished in Florence, Italy, around 1740 to 1750. I did find one reference that gave her dates as 1700 to 1758, and I emailed the woman. However, she hasn't responded. I'm not sure where she got her information. Mattai also wrote a sonata for viola and harpsichord, which was discovered in an Eastern European library in 1996. After the Soviet Union was dissolved, the library needed to pack up many items and repatriate them to their original owners. The viola sonata was owned by the Knight Templar and was shipped to a library in Kentucky. So here we have another woman who wrote some beautiful music only to be forgotten. Now, what got me really excited about this piece yesterday when I was just playing through it, it's actually in sonata allegro form, which totally blew my mind, because this is the earliest of the three sonatas that I'm showing you today, and here we are in sonata allegro form. So I can't help but wonder who she knew and who she was influenced by, since we know so little about her. So the opening section obviously would be the exposition here, and then the development beginning here. This is theme 1 here. And then we have a bridge that happens here, followed by theme 2 in here. So then when we move on to the third page, we have a recapitulation, which begins here with theme 1, the bridge, and then we have theme 2 back in the tonic key. So I found this really, really intriguing. So very, very exciting discovery. I just came across this piece fairly recently. So let's listen to the harpsichord rendition of some of this. Okay, so on the piano, in this piece is the use of the Alberti bass, and there's of course two ways to play Alberti bass. One is to keep the touch very light, with the wrist a little bit higher, and the other is to finger pedal. So I think in this particular case, I would aim for a more detached sound, given the fact that it was originally written for the harpsichord. What I thought was really terrific in this piece was this middle section. We have a bit of the Sturm und Drang happening. And it gets more intense. She goes into these minor keys, and I found the development section to be tremendously exciting. So here we have yet another wonderful piece by a composer who has never been heard of or until recently, and there's again so much incredible music by these women. So the first piece, the Bonn Sonata, is on the Conservatory Canada grade. That's on the grade 6 list, and the second one, the Edelmann, I believe is on the Conservatory Canada grade 5 list. The Matai has not yet been evaluated since it's a recent discovery. The Bonn appears in the collection, the Women Composer Collection, and the other two, the Edelmann and the Matai sonatas, will be published in a collection probably available by the end of April. So if there are any questions, let me know.
Eleanor, I just wanted to mention, it's really surprising. It must be one of the first example of Alberti bass.
I think so, because, you know, given the fact that she flourished from 1740 to 1750,
Yeah.
this is very, very early for Alberti bass. So I would love to know more about her. So far, I haven't found anything, but there must have been influence. I mean, obviously Italians, so Alberti was an Italian composer. But I'm curious to see just where she, you know, and the whole fact of being in sonata allegro form this early.
That's it.
Yeah, who were her friends? Who was she associating with?
Yeah.
So absolutely fascinating. The other thing, you know, to the Edelmann Sonata, the fact that it's published originally, the first edition, it was published as a set of 3 by her brother, and it's only in the second sonata where he acknowledges it was written by her sister. So something you have to look at is the publishing industry would have been very adverse to publishing works by women, because you have to remember during this period of time, women did not have professional positions. A woman's job was to be at home and not be out there. And publishers would have been very hesitant to publish anything by a woman composer. The other thing to look at too is, why do so many of these works exist only in first editions?
Mhm.
Being a publisher myself, what happens is when you approach a major publisher like Hal Leonard or Alfred's or Willis, any of the, you know, the bigger names out there, a lot of times they require you to sign away your rights to your work. But then if the music doesn't sell, they delist it and your work is gone. You no longer have ownership of your own material. Your work is gone. Now, in order for it to sell, it requires promotion. So if they didn't promote the works by the women, they wouldn't sell. So it was really a fait accompli. If they don't sell, they become delisted and they end up buried in a library somewhere as a first edition, never to be found until somebody blows off the dust out of these, you know, these old volumes and brings them to life. So fortunately, with the internet today, a lot of these have been scanned in the first editions, but can be difficult to read and use other clefs. It was the Edelmann where they had the tenor clef for the left hand, so you have to transpose it. And I've encountered works where they're using a soprano clef. So it can be a bit challenging. And of course, trying to decipher, sometimes if it only exists in manuscript form, trying to decipher the composer's handwriting can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. The other thing is, in a lot of the first editions, there are a lot of inaccuracies. When I published the Viardot duet, I used initially the first edition, and then I found the autograph copy, and the discrepancies were really quite disturbing. Obviously, the editor had taken liberties and removed bars and added bars that were not necessarily hers. So it's very interesting as to why these works have so long been neglected. The other thing I came across is there was a not a lottery system, a subscription system that existed. And Handel, for example, some of his works did not sell well. So what happened was a publisher would put out a subscription. So you had to subscribe to agree to purchase X number of copies of a work by a composer. So if they didn't have enough subscriptions, it might not be published or be published in a very limited capacity. So but by the same token, they would publish the list of the people who were subscribing. So if you were lucky enough to have nobility or members of the clergy or prominent people in society subscribing to purchase your music, then the lesser people of a lesser stature would be inclined to subscribe only to be affiliated or associated with the same list. So it gave them status to be associated. I am also a subscriber to the music of Handel, as is the king or whoever was on that list. So for a woman to have subscriptions for her music would have been extremely difficult. So it's quite fascinating as to why these women's works have been so long left in libraries. And it's only today that, finally they're coming, there are a number of us that are taking notice of these works, and they're fabulous works. They are as wonderful as the music by all their male compatriots.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Anyone have any questions out there? And as we're waiting, I just want to thank Eleanor, Olivia, Cecile for all their thoughts here today. I know the teachers have really enjoyed, I'm sure, all the fine detail about ornamentation and stylistic interpretation. And also this more recent discussion here the last few minutes about really, setting the stage for what happens socially, what continues to happen. So Conservatory Canada, we're more than happy to put as many of these pieces on our list as possible. And I thank all three of you for your efforts and role in getting this music out there that way for us so that we know what to put on those lists. Everyone should expect a huge update in the summer. I know last year we put some 250 pieces into the classical piano lists, and I expect we're going to be adding at least 100, if not more, this summer. Maybe just to promote a little bit here, just so you can see, this is Eleanor's, a copy of one of her books here on 3 Centuries of Keyboard Music, 3 volumes. I believe he's got a copy as well. Oh, Eleanor, when can we expect more of those? It's something that plans.
I'm not planning any more huge volumes, but I'm looking at like I did the 2 works by Hedwig Chrétien, right? The 6 preludes, and they're great for younger students. And then the teens are beautiful. Just a nice change from Clementi Kulau. The same old, same old. They have a little bit more of a modern twist. I am looking to publish a set of sonatas, one, the Edelmann Complete Sonata, the Matai, and 2 others will be in that collection. And I'm hoping to have that done by the end of April. So it'll be just a steady stream of more works coming out. I have a stack of music. I'm also working on the piano solos by Pauline Virdo, who was another composer, great friend of Chopin and George Sand, Clara and Robert Schumann. She launched the careers of so many composers, Gabriel Fauré, Borodin, Rimsky-Korsakov, and who's heard of Pauline Virdo? We know these other names, and yet she helped launch their careers. And she was very well known in her time. She was an opera singer. When her voice gave way, she turned to teaching and composing. So there's a lot of music by her for voice, but there's also a tremendous amount of music for piano and some really terrific music for piano. It's a more advanced level. So that's also in the works.
Oh, that's great. It's great to hear that. We want more music, and we've got just a plethora of new music in the past year. It's been really great to see. This is Olivia's book, Loud and Clear, a piano syllabus that's graded. Includes music by women composers of the 20th and 21st centuries. I've linked to all this stuff in the chat box. If you scroll back really in the chat box, anyone wants to see it. Anything in these books can be used on CC exams without prior approval. And then Olivia made mention of piano music. She wrote, this is by Sandra Mogensen. We've had Sandra on the show before on the webinars. That's right now from pre-grade 1 to grade 4, that she has 2 volumes out for that. So excellent session, everyone. Thanks for helping us out. This has been really great to understand the dialect of how this music works and how it goes, the social context for it. I know sometimes as teachers, we want to know more about how to interpret these things. And I think this goes a long way to giving us some ideas. And I know the question often comes up, what do examiners expect on exams? We expect students to be informed. If they want to get a really high mark in the 90s, let's say, or even the upper 80s, it's nice to have some of these ideas so that the listener can hear that they understand the dialect of how the music works. And if you follow some of the suggestions here, and one of the suggestions I really liked today a lot that I heard from all of you was, here are some options, let the student decide. It puts the control in their hands. And then it's our job to inform their ears as to what the acceptable dialect is. And I know with my students, sometimes they want to decide on something and I have to give them reasons why it's not necessarily part of the dialect. But if you do it this way, here are some of the other variables that can change. And so sometimes as teachers, we get a bit overwhelmed at understanding this dialect, but this goes a long way to giving us ideas. And I think the important thing is just to listen to people playing, good musicians playing on period instruments, and you just start to assume and absorb that dialect and be able to interpret it for yourself using your ear. It's the way it was done 300-400 years ago, and it's the way we can continue to do it today. Any other questions? Does anyone see any questions that I'm missing? Q&A box is empty. Lots of excellent feedback and kudos in the chat box. Thanks for all that, everyone, for your thoughts. I'm not seeing any outstanding questions. So again, you'll all get the replay link in your inbox later today or tomorrow. Thanks, Olivia, Cecile, Eleanor, and we look forward to having you back very soon. And to our regular audience, we'll see you next Friday, perhaps, if not a couple of weeks after that. So thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll chat again.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.